So we are now moving a bit to the west from Peshbarmak to going to Georgia. Thank you. And I'm representing the Batumi Raptor Count, and especially I'm talking on behalf of Jasper Verman and Wouter Vansteland, on whose papers my talk is based on. And I have to apologize that my talk won't follow exactly the abstract, because I was asked to talk about also to include the volunteer management in the talk, so I skip some of the things mentioned in the abstract. But I do talk about the project overview, about how we count the birds, and about our the data management and the open access data. So we have been counting for 11 years already, and been doing standardized counts since 2011. We are an NGO. We are volunteers from different European countries, and also our counters are volunteers, but the counters are trained by or led by trained coordinators. And talking about money, the yearly cost for running the count is 8,000 to 15,000 euros. So with 8,000 euros, we can manage to run the count, and with 15,000 euros, we can also pay the coordinators and have a more luxurious count in a way. And where the money comes from, we get the funding from a wide range of funds, grants, corporate and private donors, and from selling our merchandise. And in a way, it is a truly international project. This is where our volunteers come from, the countries marked with blue. And since 2008, we have had more than 350 volunteers from more than 30 countries. And one, I think, special thing about the project is that we accept the counters of all levels of experience. And when we do the daily station lists, we just try to make it as balanced as possible. And then also on the stations, everybody will get a task. So nobody, even if you're a beginner, you can do something. So everybody feels useful, and people like to feel useful. It's a bit slow. We are accommodated in the local guest houses, and this is also something special about our project, that when you come to count raptors in Georgia, you also get to learn about the Georgian culture. When you come to volunteer with us, the minimum stay we require is 12 days, but you can of course stay for the whole 2 months that we count. One thing that our volunteers point out that is very good about the project is that after the day you spend counting, we actually go through the theory of raptor identification. This is shown here on the lower photo, just presentations about identification. And we also, well, the volunteers, they pay for their own stay there, and the 16 euros per day that they pay covers the accommodation and 3 meals, and the longer you stay, the cheaper it gets. So if you stay for the whole season, then it's 8 euros per day. And the count is free for Georgians to participate. But although it is free for Georgians, we still struggle with the local capacity building. So even after 11 years, we still have quite, well, too little Georgian counters. But there are some, okay? But there are some nice examples as well. This is Aslan Polgodze, and he will give a talk in about half an hour. And yeah, he is from originally from Batumi and inspired by the Batumi Raptor Count. And this is one recent development that gives us some confidence about the sustainability of the project. This is the support from the local tourism department, and they are now constructing this counting station for us. So it should look like this in the future. Currently it's still in progress. And I think it also shows that the locals appreciate the work that we do there. And now to the map where we are. We are counting birds on the east coast of the Black Sea. And if you zoom in, this is how it looks like, the bottleneck. So it's formed by the Black Sea and the Lesser Caucasus mountain range. And we are counting just a bit to the north from Batumi city, where the bottleneck is the narrowest. And to cover the 8 kilometers wide bottleneck, we have 2 stations, which are situated on a bit higher points in the landscape. But of course, counting from 2 stations creates the possibility of double counting some birds in between the stations. And usually we just try to overcome this problem by intensive radio communication between the stations. And this is a video showing what or how the migration might look like in Batumi. These are honey buzzards migrating. And on that day, we counted more than 70,000 honey buzzards. And of course, below the layer of honey buzzards, there go booted eagles and black kites in the valleys. So it's quite a complicated task to deal with all of this. Yeah, and to handle the amount of bird that you just saw, we need a protocol. And our protocol says that we count for 2 hours in the 2 months in the autumn, and we count from sunset sunrise to sunset minus 2 hours. We have at least 6 people on the station at all times. We register as many ages as possible. As I said, we communicate by radio, and the protocol also explains the targeted monitoring approach that we have chosen, and explains the identification in morphological groups. And the last 2 ones are the ones that I would like to talk about in more detail. So first, the targeted monitoring, that during the pilot counts in the early years, we realized that the capacity that we have, with the capacity that we have, it's not possible to count all the birds that pass the bottleneck, and not even all the raptors. So we made a choice of counting less species, but collecting more high-quality data. So we register as many ages and sexes as possible. And in this table, there are the species that were for which more than 1% of the world population passes the bottleneck, hence the most important ones for Batumi. And our protocol also divides the species that we count between primary and secondary species. And the primary species are the ones that for more than 1% passes the bottleneck, or species that aggregate in a unique way in the bottleneck. And the passage of the primary species is the one that determines when we count. So those 2 months in autumn are determined by the primary species. And secondary species are counted to estimate proportions from unidentified birds, and some species that require very little count effort. And in total, it means that we count 27 raptor species and then non-raptor species. And what are morphological groups? It often happens that we fail to identify the bird to a species level because the conditions are bad, or there are just too many birds at the moment. So for example, this bird on the photo would be identified as Montpal hen, which is either Montague's pallid or hen harrier. And we also have other groups like buzzard speck or large eagle speck or medium raptor. And later we use the daily totals of the identified birds to estimate the proportions of them in the morphological groups. So for example, if we count 80 Montague's harriers in a day and 20 pallid harriers, and then let's say 200 Montpal hens, then 80% of the Montpal hens will be put to Montague's and 20% to pallid harriers. And finally, about data management, which is fully digitized. And the input is done via Tractalen app, for which we owe a great thank you to Gerard Troost. Then the second step is manual and automatic quality check of the data, after which the data goes to Tractalen, but this is still a raw data. And this image here shows the final results from last year. So it's more than 1,100,000 raptors that we counted. And here also you can see it divided between species. And I already showed this image about the possible double counts between the stations. And I mentioned that we tried to avoid double counting birds by radio communication. But to have a very conservative approach, we also have an R script for that to delete the possible double counts. So for example, if one station records an adult male Montagu's harrier, then the data is compared to the data from the other station. And if within the 10 minutes frame they also have recorded the same bird, then one of the birds gets deleted from the data. And the script is freely available. And this is Jasper Wehrmann on the picture. And the paper explaining in more detail about the double count script is now soon to be published. And finally, the data is uploaded to GBIF, and we urge everybody to use the data. It's freely available there. But before using the data, we strongly recommend reading the same paper that will soon be published. And also, please contact us and tell what you plan to do with the data, because then we can warn you about the possible pitfalls. And the take-home message from my presentation would be that the targeted monitor approach that we have selected, it allows to collect high-quality data even when the resources are limited, which they often are in the case of bird observatories. And we strongly believe that open access data facilitates research and large-scale conservation efforts. So please do use our data. Here are the references for the first one for the paper that will be published, and the second one for the data set itself. And what have we learned after 11 years of counting, and has our targeted count strategy paid off? If you want to find out, come and listen to Triin Kaasiku's talk tomorrow at around 12:40. Thank you.